Well, CGRP evolutionarily has been there for 450 million years, since the Cambrian period. Fish have CGRP, reptiles. So one thing is, if evolution deems CGRP so crucial in every organ system, we can't ignore evolution. We ignore it at our peril. And looking head to toe, CGRP does some bad things, like for migraine, creates inflammation, but it does a whole lot of good things. And blocking it leads to side effects that we've seen: constipation, anxiety, joint pains, and muscle pains. Many serious ones, such as stroke or what we call RCVS, I've seen in my clinic. The area postrema syndrome with severe nausea and vomiting, and weight loss or weight gain, and hair loss, and depression. So there's been a smattering of others. Right now, as of 3 years after these came out, we have almost 50,000 reports to the FDA. Now, those are adverse events, so we're not completely sure that they're adverse effects, which is from the drug. And we have almost 7,000 serious side effects. Serious is hospitalization or life-threatening. And only 1 to 7% of serious side effects are actually reported to the FDA. Tom Moore is an expert on adverse effects in clinical trials and new drugs. He edits this terrific online journal, Quarter Watch, which goes over all the new drugs and the side effects. And in Quarter Watch, he states that only 1 to 7% of serious ones. We have no idea how many non-serious are not. It's a tiny fraction are actually reported. So 50,000 in 3 years, that's about the same number as onabotulinum toxin or Botox, but in 29 years. So in 25 years of using Botox every day, we've seen almost nothing, almost no, we've seen no serious side effects. And in my tiny practice, just in 3 years, we've had 4 or 5 serious side effects, adverse effects, which we're sure are from the drug, to the CGRP monoclonals. So there's a number of reasons why the studies miss the side effects. And one of them is that they don't use a checklist. People come in and, how are you doing? Any problems, any side effects, how are you feeling? And not much more than that in the studies. So we did a checklist study where we looked at about 120 patients and asked them, from a checklist of 18 common side effects that we saw from CGRPs, and we went over it with them. And to be an adverse effect versus an adverse event, I don't even know why they include adverse events in studies, because they're just anything that can happen on that drug. But we don't care about anything that can happen, such as upper respiratory infection or headache, if it's not related. What we really care about is what's from that drug. So we did this study where we asked them in the usual way. First, how are you doing? Any side effects? And then we presented the checklist and went over each carefully defined anxiety, constipation, depression, joint pains. And about 2/3 of the patients had at least one more adverse effect than just asking them in the usual way. And some had 2 or 3 or 4 more adverse effects. So we should be collecting adverse effects. The studies also, the phase 3 studies, are underpowered for adverse effects. They need another few thousand patients, and they're underpowered for time. We really would need 3 years, 4 years. And we're just talking about short-term side effects here. We're not talking about long-term. Long-term, there's a lot of scary possibilities to blocking CGRPs. Now, I use these drugs. but I position them more as a last resort. And I'm seeing, because the PIs are clean, we see patients. I had a patient in yesterday who hadn't tried any preventives, and the neurologist had put her on Areninab, and she had side effects. So I think that what happens in the studies is the side effects get what we call disaggregated, where I might say I'm tired, the next person said they have malaise, the next person somnolent, and they're all 2 or 3%, and they come under the radar. But when we look, the actual incidence of tiredness in that population is 6 or 7%, but it doesn't get listed. So disaggregation is a problem, the underpowering, the lack of a checklist, and the patients really in the studies tend to be a little milder. They don't have nearly as many comorbidities. So we end up with a PI that's clean with no side effects, and 2 or 3 years later, tons of side effects. And that's happened with a number of monoclonal antibodies and other drugs. So what are we supposed to do to parse together the true adverse event, adverse effect profile? We have to wait till it comes out, and then 9 months later, a year later, put together multiple lines of evidence, which I've done. And those lines include all the case reports that have come out since, and studies, our own experience. I'm on chat boards with 500 headache providers, so I get their feeling. And very importantly, we monitor some patient chat boards. There's 70,000 people contributing about CGRPs. We actually went over almost 3,000 comments on patient chat boards and parsed it down to about 500 highly believable comments from the patients. And we put those in our database along with these others. And what happens is, and we also look at, very importantly, the FDA website, the FDA FAERS website, which isn't perfect, but it's the best we have. So all these lines of evidence sort of line up with these CGRPs, those side effects that I mentioned. Constipation is the number one. There's already a black box warning about hypertension, I believe. CGRP does a lot of good things, and one is a vasodilator, and it prevents hypertension. And we've seen the onset of hypertension in some patients. There's a warning also about constipation. It does a lot in the GI system, protecting from ulcers. Wounds and skin healing are crucial, are dependent upon CGRP, and none of this was studied in studies. Hormonal effects, we have no idea about. I've asked the companies, and to date, they haven't published on hormonal effects, and some young people, a lot of young people are starting to take these, and they're looking at them in adolescence. They're not officially approved yet. There's many other possible effects on bone healing and bone metabolism. We need CGRP. So in young people or in older people, is this going to be a problem? After age 70, our CGRP goes down. And blocking it, what's the effect? There's a lot of older folks on these drugs. Are we going to have worse strokes, worse heart attacks? We don't really know yet. And again, I'm just talking about short-term side effects. Long-term, I always say use new drugs a lot while they're still safe, because we never know. And we would have to wait 5-10 years to see some of the long-term effects. They do have some, Amgen does have some 5-year data, and that's nice. But really, we really don't know. And there's a lot of other effects of CGRP. With sepsis, you need it. Under stress, it hasn't been checked or tested, blocking CGRP. So the heart and stroke, etc. So there are areas of the brain that these big molecules can penetrate because they're not well protected from the blood-brain barrier, such as part of the hypothalamus and the pituitary. and the area postrema. So because I've published a lot on this, I seem to get emails from patients, from doctors about serious adverse effects from these. And this is typical. A doctor emailed me about his wife who was severely nauseous after taking a CGRP monoclonal for 3 months in a row. She was severely nauseous. 2 GI workups were negative. And I said, you're going to have to stop it. It's probably the area postrema syndrome with severe nausea. And he said, well, nothing's on the PI, and the company said they didn't know anything about it. And that's the problem. Is if the company is not doesn't know anything and the PI doesn't reveal, patients are minimized in their side effects. They go in and they say, doctor, I am losing my hair since being on this. I've gained weight. Doctor says, well, it can't possibly be from the injection, from the CGRP monoclonal. And they're minimized, they're dismissed. A lot of patients are angry about this. So we really need to change how we acquire side effects in clinical trials. And it's not that the companies are hiding anything. They're not. They're doing good studies. They're done by independent contract research organizations usually. It's just, I think the FDA has to change, along with some experts, how they are acquired. And we're at this really scary, somewhat insane point where we have clean PIs and tons of adverse effects. So if we can't trust the PI, what can we do? It ends up hurting a lot of patients. I'm not saying we should take these off the market, but it's a problem and we have to address it.